Hello Year 9. I'm going to talk to you today about what the GCSE history course contains, the content that you'll cover, why you should consider studying it, how you're assessed, and also the types of jobs that could be available to you if you choose to study history at GCSE and beyond. So the GCSE course is divided into 3 exam papers. All of them are assessed at the end of Year 11. The first paper is paper 1, Medicine Through Time, 1250 to the present day. So this part of the course covers a long period in history, and it's known as the development study. And you'll be looking at how people's attitudes to disease have changed, how understanding about the causes of disease have changed, understanding about how methods of treatment and prevention of disease have also changed, and thinking about the role of factors in the development of medicine, factors such as the government, of key individuals, education, and so on. So it's a really, really interesting study, and you come across a lot of interesting people actually along the way too. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the key figures and the key topics within this. So this is an interesting, slightly shocking photograph here. This shows a process called trepanning or trephination, and this was a practice commonly done in the Middle Ages. And the reason that people would do this is because they thought that what was making them ill was having evil spirits trapped inside their skull. And they thought that the only way to release these evil spirits and therefore become better would be to drill a hole into the top of the skull to release them. And so that is what people used to believe. The reason they used to believe this is because science had not developed at all by then. So you'll be understanding why that is. Why did beliefs like this exist for a long, long time as well? Very interesting. Another interesting question. How did a grave-robbing Belgian dwarf transform our understanding of anatomy? A very odd-sounding question. There is a photograph, not a photograph, an image of the said dwarf. His name was Vesalius on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. He was quite a strange person, but a very important person, because at the time it was illegal for anybody to dissect the human body, and therefore it was impossible for anybody to have a detailed understanding of the human anatomy, which meant in turn that surgery was practically impossible. And so in order to make any progress whatsoever on that front, it took people like Vesalius to break the law, in fact. And so he would actually venture out after dark, dig up the dead bodies from their graves and dissect them to learn more about the human body. This is an interesting one and something that is quite relevant today. This is people's reaction to the first ever vaccination. If you look closely, you can see that there are what appear to be cows coming out of people's body parts. And you can see by looking at their faces, they're very alarmed and they're very scared. Why was this? Well, the first ever vaccination was the vaccination against smallpox. And the reason that this was possible was because a man named Edward Jenner had observed that milkmaids who came into contact with the cowpox virus through milking the cows were somehow immune to catching the smallpox virus. So he decided to experiment and to inject people with the cowpox. And lo and behold, these people developed immunity to smallpox too. But it did mean that there was a lot of opposition to this vaccination. People had never heard of it before. They were quite confused about what was being put into their bodies. And sadly, this fear of vaccination hasn't gone away, and we do see a growing number, sadly, of people who are opposed to vaccination because of the fear of what it might do to the body. The science says, of course, that vaccination is the best way to prevent, the only way, in fact, to prevent the spread of infectious disease. So we're all hoping now that there will be a vaccination found for coronavirus at the moment. So a really important development that paved the way for future vaccinations to be introduced. This photograph, sorry, I keep saying photograph, This source shows the experience of surgery in the 1800s too, and it looks absolutely horrifying. The reason it's taking 7 people to hold that man down to have his leg amputated is because there was no anaesthetics to numb the pain, there were no antibiotics to treat the infection either. So most patients would have died following surgery. And for this reason, surgery was really done as a last resort. And as you can imagine, advanced surgery was simply not possible due to this. Okay, so having covered a long period of history looking at the development of medicine, you're well placed to understand how attitudes and how science has developed over time. So really, really interesting course there. That brings us to paper 2. So paper 2 is split into 2 topics. The first one looks at early Elizabethan England, so within which you're covering things like the religious settlement, the Elizabeth's relations with other countries too, like Spain, the Spanish Armada, exploration of the New World, so the role of Sir Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh in discovering America and colonizing America. And then on the other side of paper 2, you've got a completely different topic, not related at all, and this is superpower relations in the Cold War, so the rise in hostility between the 2 emerging superpowers, the USA and the USSR, Soviet Union, or as it's known today, Russia, following the Second World War. Paper 3 is Weimar and Nazi Germany, so a lot of you will be familiar with this because you've covered some of this already in Year 9. The key question here to consider is, how did Europe's most liberal democratic country give way to fascism? A fascinating question, and one that is definitely very, very relevant today. So I think a lot of you will really enjoy this one in particular. So I said at the beginning that you'll be assessed in 3 exam papers. Medicine is worth 30%. The paper 2, Elizabeth and the Cold War, both worth 40% together, and then Germany is your final 30%. There'll be a combination of source skills and extended writing essay-based questions, but nobody should feel worried about these because actually, if you think about all of your big writes, you've actually covered most, if not all, of the question types that will come up on the GCSE paper. So it's nice to know going into it that you have had practice at writing some of these questions already. What can you do if you study history in terms of a job afterwards? There's lots and lots of possibilities involving research, archaeology, teaching, if you're still interested in continuing your love of history. But there's also other professions that really, really regard history very highly too, such as law and journalism. So to be a good lawyer, for instance, you need to be able to develop a good argument, to select evidence to support your argument, to consider 2 different sides of the argument, to show why your side of the argument is stronger. Similar in journalism too, and so that's why history, the skills that you learn in history are really, really valuable to these types of careers. A lot of people also go into things like public relations and the media too. It's also really, really essential for a lot of the creative professions as well. So being a video game designer or being a film director or a costume designer may require you to actually have a really in-depth knowledge of history, particularly if it's set in a historical time period. Lots and lots of films, of course, are set in history, and so knowledge of history will be really, really useful in these industries. To sum up, you should consider choosing History GCSE if you are interested in learning about how the world has changed over the last 1,000 years. If you enjoy reading, if you enjoy writing essays and extended pieces of writing, there is a lot of writing in history. If you enjoy debating, if you're confident in interpreting and analysing historical sources, and that's something that you really enjoy in terms of helping you find out more about the past. And finally, if you are prepared to spend time reading and absorbing the content independently for homework each week, you will get set quite a lot of homework that will ask you to read sections of a textbook and write up some notes in your exercise book. And this is really, really helpful because it means that you're coming into the lessons already knowing a little bit about the background content. And then it means that in lessons we can actually push forward, we can get into more of the debates and more of the interesting things and do some more exam practice. So if you're happy to work independently, do a lot of reading, a lot of note taking, answering a lot of extended writing, then history will be really, really suitable for you. I'll finish the presentation by leaving you with this quote. "The only thing new in the world is the history that you don't know," by Harry S. Truman, who was a former president of the United States. And I think that is a very, very fitting quote to finish with. If anybody does have any questions, please get in touch with your history teacher and I'm sure they will be happy to answer them. Thank you for listening and best of luck with your GCSE options.